Welcome to the Teachers on Fire podcast, where I profile agents of growth and transformation in education today. Each guest shares their highs, their lows, their passions, their goals, and the resources that are shaping their thinking and inspiring their practice. For show notes and links from each episode, visit teachersonfire.net. You can also follow the show at Teachers on Fire on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And of course, please subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm your host, Tim Cavey. Let's meet today's guest. Today, I'm speaking with Scott Nunes. Scott is a dad, teacher, coach, Schoology ambassador, CCQ board member, Nearpod certified, and MIE certified. He's also a site leader, rapper, and co-host of the TNT EdTech Podcast. Follow Scott on Twitter at Mr. Nunes Teach. And you can follow the podcast on Twitter as well at TNT EdTech. Visit the podcast website at tntedtech.com. Scott, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Are you ready to talk education?
I'm ready.
All right, man. Well, hey, it's been fun to follow you and connect for some time on Twitter. So I'm excited to have this real-time connection. Why don't you start by telling us a little bit more about your current context in education? What does that look like?
Yeah, so I'm a 9th and 10th grade ELA teacher over in Modesto, California, and I'm also on site leadership for digital curriculum. As you mentioned, I coach swim, and I'm a club advisor, and just looking to kind of branch out. And what's unique about my school is we're in a high kind of poverty area, except my school is a little more affluent. And so they're non-Title I, which means like to qualify for Title I, I think something like 67% of your student population has to be, below the poverty line. And I think our population is 51% or thereabouts.
Well, it's always fun to connect with other English teachers who are interested in ed tech, and we're going to get into all of that in a few minutes. But first of all, Scott, we want to hear more about your journey. So let's start with story time. Share with us, if you will, about a low moment or an experience of adversity that you faced somewhere in your teaching or education career, and describe how you overcame it.
Yeah, so my low moment actually came right before teaching, and it's what got me into teaching. So I used to do graphic design. It's something I really liked, and that was a really neat field for me because in high school, I actually got a D+ in art, and I worked my butt off. And so to be able to do graphic design and kind of, prove that teacher wrong, that was neat. But then I failed at that miserably when the economy tanked. So did my career, and it was uber challenging. I lost my job and I started freelancing. I was doing okay with that for a while, but then I started getting beat out by all of these foreign groups and designers. They were able to do what I was doing, and they could do it so much faster, and they could do it so cheap. I used to be on a site like getafreelancer.com, very similar to how Fiverr works. And wow, I had to look for something different. I narrowed it down to teaching and nursing, took classes for both. And once I started taking the teaching courses, I dropped all the nursing courses and said, hey, this is it. I can do this. And I haven't looked back since.
That's fantastic. I love career turnaround stories. And hey, the graphic design is still in you. Do you follow that scene at all, or do you dabble? Do you do any freelancing? I'm sure it sounds like you're not on freelancer.com anymore, but
yeah. No more freelancing. It kind of stresses me out. I still do it, but for example, I just did a logo for CCQ, and for our podcast, we're promoting and sponsoring a hike for Q, which stands for Computer Using Educators. It's based out in California, but there's also an organization in Nevada. And so we're having the LDI conference. It's Leadership Development Institute. And, it's kind of a big deal. And I designed a logo for our hike. We're doing stickers, and it took me like 4 to 6 hours for this very simple logo where, somebody who's doing it now, they could probably do that easily in 20 to 30 minutes. So I'm highly inefficient. I'm super slow, even though I enjoy it. But if you've seen my Mr. Nunes Teach logo, I designed that one. I'm proud of that one. That's kind of like my bread and butter right now. So I still dabble in it, just not for pay.
Fair enough. And if you haven't seen Scott's podcast header, that's a really fun look as well. And the logo for the podcast, there's some great things going on there. And I need to pick your brain, I think, to liven up my stuff. But well, that's good to hear, Scott. And I'm sure you bring a lot of expertise and ideas into your teaching from that background. So that's really cool. Scott, one of my favorite all-time tweets from you in the last year was one of you dancing it up. I'd love to hear the backstory on that. You also call yourself a rapper. So talk to us about what this all looks like for you in your practice. How do music and celebration propel your work as an educator?
Yeah, so to talk about the dance a little bit, that was at the Schoology Next conference in 2018, and that was a blast. And that conference got me to get on Twitter. And when I started, I only had 8 followers, and 6 of those I had picked up at the ISTE conference last year. And so they really just walked me through the Schoology ambassadors, and it was that community aspect that really tied me with that brand. I owe so much of what I've been able to accomplish to Schoology, and specifically the Schoology ambassadors. We really are like a family, and so that's been great. And then in terms of the rapping and kind of the dancing all together, I like to have fun in the classroom. And so, it's a way to engage my students, and sometimes I'll spontaneously freestyle to hook them into a lesson, to excite them, or sometimes just to entertain them, or even reward them, like, hey, you guys killed it. Do you guys want to freestyle right now? Like, we got a few minutes here. And then I'll set up like different challenges. Sometimes they'll pick the topic or some of the words, and they'll try and trip me up, like, how do you rhyme with orange? And so I'll take a note from the famous rapper Eminem, and kind of enunciate the word differently, like orange, dorange, something like that, to get it to rhyme. And that's kind of cool. It makes it fun for them, keeps it lively, keeps it fresh.
Well, your classroom sounds like a pretty fun place to learn. Scott, let's talk about the TNT EdTech Podcast, which you host with Matthew Ketchum. What are you guys all about?
TNT stands for Tech Coach and Teacher. And Matthew and I have been working together for a while, and we really came together with last year's conferences. And we were at a conference called Fall Q in Northern California, and we went to a session on podcasting, and the podcasters were Tom and Mike from TOSAs Talking Tech, and they're like, super easy. You can even do it with your phone. And once we saw how simple it was and how we could do it with minimal equipment, we thought, hey, let's try it. And Matthew just happened to have a set of nice mics and some nice gear already, and we had the software already on our computers. We have some pretty cool things on our computers that we use, like Camtasia or Adobe Audition, or free stuff like Audacity. We've kind of experimented with it all. And then we use Google Hangouts to connect with our listeners generally, but we've also used other apps. And what people can expect to hear from us are just kind of personal stories. We started with just a heavy like ed tech, and we still talk about ed tech, but similar to your show, we like to bring on guests and hear their story and their kind of tech journey. So we quickly shifted to that format, like the host and guest format. And that works really well for us. It keeps it dynamic, keeps it fresh. And then we sprinkle like cool tools and pro tips. So things like Gimkit, like how do you use Gimkit? What is Gimkit? And here's how you can kind of leverage that and scaffold it in different um, content areas. And so I bring the classroom experience, and then Matthew brings like the coaching experience. And he's the only tech coach for our district. And we have 30,000 students. So whenever I mention that, people are like, wow, right? I mean, that's huge. I've never heard of anybody else doing his job. And he knows everything from iPads to Chromebooks. We primarily have one-to-one Chromebooks, grades 6 through 12, but we're piloting with some of the younger grades. And there is one school that is one-to-one, and I can't remember, maybe iPads. But Matthew, does it up with all the ed tech stuff for all of those grades. So he's amazing.
Isn't podcasting fun? I mean, don't you find you learn something in every single interview?
Totally. Actually, right before this, I had a guest on our podcast, and I felt like I was just taking notes the whole time. Like it felt like PD for me. So I totally agree. I think I gain so much more than I give, and I feel guilty sometimes for that.
Well, I know sometimes I have to pinch myself, because I have these opportunities to speak with amazing people like yourself that otherwise I would just have no way of getting on the line with, for half an hour or 45 minutes. And so this is an incredible privilege. And I'm encouraging teachers everywhere to jump on board. I mean, we have a lot, but we could use some more. And if you've got the itch to get in on podcasting, it's easy to do. So, Scott, as you look across your PLN and your own practice, what else is setting you on fire about education today? This could be kind of a big picture idea or something you're doing on the micro level right there in your classroom.
Yeah, so there's a lot. I'm kind of all over the place, but if I had to kind of pick one, my biggest interest right now would be just on connecting with other teachers and sharing their stories. So we talk a lot about student voice and student choice, but what I'm into right now is amplifying teacher voice. And so you mentioned the podcasting. I think that's a great way. Um, that's what I'm into right now. And I'm actually going to start a student podcast. I don't know how that's going to work out yet. I'm still working out the details with my site. I'm thinking about starting a club and getting some trusted kiddos to kind of help spearhead that. And my idea was we would start with kind of prescribed topics that I would come up with and prescribed formats. And then as the year goes on, the reins would kind of come off, and they would be able to independently select and edit. And of course, I would check the final edits and approve them, and then they could post and share out. And I just have to double check with my district. They're really good about following all of the rules, like FERPA and things like that, student privacy stuff. So we may not be able to publish to the web. It might have to stay at the district level. So I'm not sure, but if I can publish to the web at some point, I would like to do that.
I've dabbled a little bit with that last year, and I haven't gotten into any trouble yet for publishing. I've just kept it to first names and not stating any legal names in show notes. And so far that's been okay for my administration. If I can talk shop here on the student podcasting for a moment, first of all, have you heard of Hans Appel's award-winning culture podcast?
No, I haven't.
Okay. So I think if memory serves correctly, he's in California as well, but that's definitely one to take a look at. He's doing some great things. Like I said, I did a little bit with this last year, and for any teachers out there thinking about getting into podcasting, I've got maybe one piece of advice, and that is if you're trying to record a conversation, that's considerably more work, and I think that's what you're describing. There's if there's a back and forth going on, then it's going to require a little bit more setup, and it's also going to require more post-production editing, right? There's another way to do this, and that is, do you use Google Classroom at your school, Scott?
No, actually, we use Schoology, which is like a
Oh, that's a super dumb question. Of course,
but I have
You're a
used
Schoology
it.
ambassador.
Yes, before I was with Schoology, I did use Google Classroom, so I'm familiar with it.
Yeah, that was a mind blank. Sorry about that. Okay, so Schoology, of
No, all
course.
good.
But I'm sure, and I haven't been inside Schoology, but I'm sure it has the same capabilities, if not more. Google Classroom is pretty basic, but what I was leading up to is that what I found was that with a Google Classroom, I could ask students to prepare some kind of a reflection. So I did a number on book reviews, for example, and then students just go off into a quiet corner of the school. They record the audio file just on their laptop or whatever device they have. They post the audio file into Classroom, and then, as you know, Classroom creates a Google Drive folder for that unique assignment. And then I would just slide all of those audio files over from Google Drive straight into Anchor. And I'm not sure if you've played with Anchor yet, but it's free and it's pretty easy to work with. So
Yeah, I agree. That's what we use for the podcast distribution, actually, is Anchor. So we record outside of Anchor, but then in the end, post production, we put it in Anchor and then send it out to the world.
And I'm exactly the same. So, yeah, I found that with what I just described, the process of students recording, uploading to Classroom, and then I would just slide them into Anchor and publish, I could get that all done in about half an hour, 40 minutes after the school day, and sort of get that out there before I went home. And so that was super fast and efficient, and you still hear a lot of student voices. You don't get that, as I said, back and forth quality of a conversation, but it is a way to get student voices out there. So lots of different ways that you can do this. And Scott, that would be amazing if you do get this off the ground. I'd love to stay connected on that and listen in on what your students are doing. If you do get that green light to go outside of the district, that would be really fun.
Yeah. Can I offer one pro tip for student sound quality?
Yeah, definitely.
On a very tight budget, you can get foam like I'm blanking right now, but it's like audio foam. That's not what it is, but if you type in audio foam, it'll come up. It's like noise canceling foam, something like that. Anyways, you take like a cardboard box, or usually I'll use like the ones that I get for paper. Even though I'm working towards going paperless, we still do have like some prescribed packets that we need to use for English. So I'm not completely like off the hook with worksheets and certain things. I just try and make them a little more interesting. But I'll take those paper boxes and then I can quickly line those with this foam, and then boom, it's like a portable sound booth. And I've had great success with student audio. You just put the laptop or the mic or your one-to-one device in there, and it'll block a lot of sound. And students just need to kind of peek their head in towards the mic portion, and I'll get some really good audio even in a packed classroom.
That is really cool. I have not tried that. I mean, I assumed that you were talking about the problems around echo, and sometimes I've heard that, but to think about students being able to pull that off together in a classroom, I mean, that's been one of the challenges around Flipgrid, I think, is
Right. That's how I've done that, was with Flipgrid videos or, little audio bits.
Well, that's a great tip. Thanks, Scott. We should move on. We could talk podcasting longer, I think, but let's move on. Scott, tell us about how you are looking to grow professionally and improve your practice in the coming year. Can you share about a specific professional goal or some project that you're currently working on?
Yeah. So something I want to get into is blogging, and I've been blessed through Q to be sponsored. We have the official sponsored podcast for Q with TNT, and as part of that agreement, we have to do a weekly blog. And so I'm going to take that practice, and when that partnership ends, I'm going to just transfer that time invested into a personal blog. So that's the goal, and then just kind of see where it goes from there. I'm super excited about education, so I think I'll have a lot to say.
That is exciting, and that's another one of my loves. Outside of education, Scott, what's another area of learning for you? What is it that ignites your passions outside of the school and brings you alive as a human being?
I'm going to give you an odd one. um,
Love it.
I really like to go to the beach, and specifically at the beach, I like to build sandcastles. So, one of my hopes and dreams is to enter like an amateur sandcastle competition. Like, I always set out for it like the last 2, 3 years, and it's just never really worked out. Like, something will come up that will prevent me from attending an actual contest. But while the kids are playing or building their castles, I'll build like a giant, like 3 foot, structure, and it takes me a few hours, and it's a great way for me to decompress too.
That is really, really cool. I love that hobby. Do you have any kids at home, Scott?
Oh yeah, so I'm blessed with 3 kids. They keep me pretty busy.
Well, they must be fans of your work there as well. I can only imagine you've got a few apprentices in the wings.
Definitely more so deconstructionists.
Right, right. Scott, share about a personal habit or a productivity hack that contributes to your success. How do you get it all done?
So I listened to this piece on YouTube. This guy only works for like 4 minutes a day. It sounds crazy, but um, I listened to that, and all of these like kind of self help books and books CEOs have put out on efficiency. And so the first 90 minutes of my day are just very task driven, and I just try and crank out big things in the morning. And I don't pick a lot of things. I pick 1 to 3 things to do very well, and I just focus on those. So that'd be my pro tip.
Well, that is something that I need to improve in. It's so tempting to keep that Twitter tab open, but that destroys your productivity. So thank you for that nudge, Scott. It's now time for your quick picks. And here we want to know the education voices and resources that are shaping your practice and inspiring your thinking today. So starting at Twitter, tell us about someone we should follow there and share why they've been inspiring you lately.
Yeah, so I know a lot of people know Matt Miller, but I would say definitely follow Matt Miller. And if you're already following, follow a little bit more closely, because he's the real deal. He's as real in person as he is on Twitter or in his books, and he doesn't fold under pressure. And I imagine, like many of us, he wants to at times, but he's able to consistently move forward in a positive direction. And we have a special connection. He's taken the time to amplify my voice and the voice of others through different opportunities, mentions on Twitter, retweets, things like that. And a special one is during this last ISTE conference, 2019, he mentioned one of my tweets during his ditch panel session. And so that was a special moment.
That's awesome. Yeah, Matt Miller, definitely a can't miss follow there. Scott, point us to an ed tech tool that you currently love using somewhere in your practice or maybe somewhere in your personal work.
Yeah, I would say Gimkit. That's my new thing. I had a lot of time to play with it over the summer. Like, wow, that's just a fun game. And Michael Matera and Jonathan Spike had a great session on how to kind of take these games like Kahoot, Gimkit, and make them your own. So that's something I really want to play with this year in the classroom.
So is Gimkit a review game along the lines of Kahoot?
Yeah, it's a formative assessment tool. And so you can use it in a number of ways. What's unique about that one is you get the same questions over and over and over again. So it really lends itself towards mastery, which is key. So you're not necessarily out if you don't get it right. And so if you're really good at memorizing answers, you'll get it. Or let me back up a little bit. When you get an answer wrong, it gives you the correct answer. And so it's not a one and done. You will get that question again unless you have a super large question pool. And the way it operates is you have all these questions, let's say like 20, and then you have like a time frame, maybe like 5 minutes to answer these. And every time you get it right, you get points, and then or you get some kind of currency. It's not quite points. You get this currency, and then with the currency, you can then buy options. You can buy like a point multiplier. You can buy a set of insurance. So if you get a question wrong, you're okay. You can buy an option where if you're on a hot streak, it exponentially increases those values. And so there's some strategy involved. I like it.
Scott, is that a free platform or is it a freemium?
Yeah, totally free. And for those unfamiliar with it, Gimkit, Gimkit, was created by a high schooler. He just
No way.
graduated this year. Yeah.
Well, that's an awesome story and another tool, another strategy that I look forward to trying out in the fall. So thank you for that. Scott, recommend a book, one that you've been reading lately, or maybe one of your all-time faves, and tell us why you recommend it.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think one that's one of my all-time faves is Welcome to the Grind by Dr. Randall Sampson. And that's one probably not as many people are familiar with. Randall's really modest in person, and I really like chapters 2 and 3 where he's talking about effective leadership. For me, I thrive under effective leadership. And so I really recommend your listeners pick that up and really hone in on those 2 chapters.
We know you're a podcast guy, Scott. And now, besides Teachers on Fire and TNT EdTech, 2 great podcasts that we would strongly recommend, tell us about another one that you've got in your deck right now.
I would say Between the Johns with John Martinez. He and his co-host, another John. I don't want to butcher his last name. And so that's really good. They're both admin. And so they come from that perspective. And they have on a lot of their local talent. And so that's really great. I like it.
If you're a YouTube guy, tell us about a channel that you enjoy and explain why we should subscribe.
Ooh, definitely 3D printing nerd. And so Joel, the host of that show, just shows you all these different 3D printers and how to use them and how to troubleshoot, and does these super cool builds. It's one of the things that keeps me going in my 3D printing journey.
Okay, pretty cool. Last one, Scott, completely off the education radar, just for fun. What are you watching on Netflix right now?
So on Netflix, I just switched, and so I'm watching some Spider-Man movie. I can't even remember like the official title. It just came out on Netflix. I was trying to preview it to see if it was appropriate for my kids. So there's that one, and then I hate to admit it, but watching Breaking Bad again. It's kind of violent. Goes, it's pretty extreme at times, but man, it just sucks you in.
It does it ever. One of my all-time favorite shows, and you're encouraging me to take another look at that one. So I'm with you on the Breaking Bad. I know my boys would agree on the Spider-Man. Scott, this has been a blast. What are the best ways for the listeners to follow you and connect more with your expertise in design and ed tech and everything else you're putting out there?
Yeah, so most active on Twitter. So following me at Mr. Nunes Teach on Twitter, but that also works for Voxer and Facebook as well. My Instagram, I'm not as active on there, but it is I am Mr. EdTech. That's the handle for the Instagram. And then, of course, on the www.tntedtech.com website.
Sounds good, Scott. Again, thank you so much for sharing your time with the podcast today on relatively short notice, I have to add. This has been super fun and enlightening. What a blast to be able to connect with you, and look forward to continued learning going forward. So take care, Scott, and let's talk again soon.
Yes, I'd love that. Thank you.
Thanks for joining me today here on the Teachers on Fire podcast. For show notes and links from this episode, visit teachersonfire.net. You can also follow the show at Teachers on Fire on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And again, please do subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. Before we sign off today, I'd like to invite you to leave any questions, suggestions, or feedback to the show in the form of a voice message. You can do so by locating Teachers on Fire in the Anchor app, or if you're on Voxer, leave me a message at Tim Cavey. Either way, I'd be thrilled to hear from you and feature your message in a future episode. Hey Teachers on Fire, I have some exciting news to share. I've launched a new podcast called the Teacher Blogs Podcast, a podcast for teachers who have more time to listen to blog posts than to read them. The mission of this podcast is to amplify the voices of education writers that are seen, read, but need to be heard. This past week on the Teacher Blogs Podcast featured my voice and those of writers Andrew Julian and Caitlin Giordano. And your voice could be next. All you need to do is use your phone's voice memo app to record yourself reading your own blog post. Then use the share button to email the voice file to teacherblogspodcast@gmail.com. If you've written a blog post that you'd like me to consider featuring, please message me at teacher_blogs on Twitter. This is an easy way to share your message and let other educators know about your blog. Next, I'd like to thank all those who encourage and support the podcast on Twitter. Katie Alvarez, and she can be found at Fresh from the Fourth, recently tweeted, "Hooked to Teachers on Fire podcast. Go hit that subscribe button. Amazing interviews that will leave you inspired to grow as an educator. Great job, Mr. Cavey." The Next Step Educational Podcast, and they can be found at The Next Step Edu, tweeted, "Teachers on Fire, thanks for the follow. We are definite fans of the podcast and love listening to all you have to share. Keep it up." And then Brian Carpenter at Brian Carr tweeted, hashtag fresh air at 5.9 kilometers at Teachers on Fire. Episode 89 with at _S, that's Lynn Colon, as she talks about Empower Our Girls, authored with Mr. Adam Welcome, to raise our girls to be strong and not overprotected, as that diminishes their courage. Must read as I raise my own 2 girls. Hashtag balance like a pirate. Well, thanks so much for the encouragement, Katie, The Next Step Edu, and Brian. You 3 were the fuel to my fire this week, and to everyone else who has liked, retweeted, replied, and engaged with me on Twitter, thank you so much. It was a lot of fun to jump into some Twitter chats this week, first time in a while for that, and I look forward to more throughout the summer. I will also invite you to check out the Teachers on Fire magazine on Medium. This week we featured ISTE 29 Takeaways by Dr. Samantha Fesich, and she can be found at sfesich on Twitter. In this piece, Sam combines her own reflections from the conference with 5 other dynamic educators. This article offers great picks, anecdotes, and links to many resources. If you are still glowing from ISTE, you will enjoy this article. The magazine also featured a post from me, finally. It's been quite a while since I've been able to sit down and pound out some writing myself, so it was a joy to finally get back to it on my first week of summer. Yes, it was only my first week of summer this past week. My article was inspired by Dr. Justin Tart on Twitter, who asked his followers to think about the things they want to stop, start, and continue next school year. I thought that was such a good formula for self-reflection. So that is the title of my piece, Stop, Start, Continue. And I took a look at what needs work, what went well, and what I would like to try in my practice this fall. So please check that out. The Teachers on Fire magazine is a Medium publication, and you'll find it on medium.com or on the Medium app. If you're already an education blogger, consider joining our growing writing team. You can continue to publish content on your own blog, and you keep full credit and ownership of your content on Medium. Message Teachers on Fire on any social media platform for more details. Again, I'm your host, Tim Cavey, and I'm so grateful that you decided to spend some of your day listening to this podcast. I hope that in some way the content you heard today ignited your thinking and inspired your practice. And I'll meet you next week right here on the Teachers on Fire podcast.